Good afternoon, everyone. We're a little day late and a dollar short, but we're here.
That's what counts. We're here.
Now that, StreamYards lets us go live. Yay, it's about time. Yesterday I hit that
Thank you,
damn button
StreamYard.
and it didn't do nothing but give me the finger. Bloody hell. All right, so we're going to take a quick spin through the chat. We have Mark Dainfully Tired, My Love, Miss Canuck. Hopefully your work isn't driving you too crazy. John DeMarco and James Furman, welcome. Also, this morning we had our tribute video to my late co-host, Admiral of Doom, drop on the channel. It was to mark October the 2nd when Paula Simpson, his wife, had a celebration of life that unfortunately a lot of us couldn't attend because, well, we live in other countries and other states. So it was a way of a few of us being able to say a few things and show our support for Paula. So if you do have a chance to later on today, do check that out. It's pinned in the pinned comment, and it's also on the main channel as of 7 o'clock this morning. Myself, Revan, and Paula collaborated on that, so I hope you all enjoy it and take a couple minutes to remember the man who used to sit in the co-host chair of History with R&R. So today we're going to finally be able to bring up our guest, and we're going to be turning our attention over to Russia before it was communist, which is a fun trip because you usually only talk about Russia when we're talking about Stalin and the fall and World War II, World War One. But we're going a little bit before that. But before we do that, I should bring in our guest so that he can talk. Farv, welcome to the chat, finally.
Hey, how you guys going?
Not too bad. And welcome, Purple Valkyrie.
It's a morning, right?
It's a morning. Yeah, well, afternoon now. Normally
it was a morning.
It was a morning when I sent you the link.
Technically, it's
been
morning for me for a while. So.
Yeah.
All right. The spirit of things, let's for just a minute. I don't normally appear on camera, but
there we go.
Second.
History of R&R exclusive.
Yeah, I got a little bit of history with this subject, and then I had to remember a lot of it, so I got to navigate this stack of books around my desk. I'm trying not to spill my coffee on shit.
So that's sacrilege.
Oh, you can't waste the coffee.
No.
I try to waste
it. That's too valuable.
Yeah. Coffee is the lifeblood of YouTubers and humans in general.
That's not wrong, really.
Unless you're in Britain, then it's tea, but I don't understand that whole tea thing.
Well, it's a thing. I drink it occasionally, but
All right, so let's peer in. So whereabouts are you going to start us off here? Because we're talking about Russia when it still had a czar.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to go through the czar. That would take
too long.
But
briefly, just Vlad would take 16 chapters. But
yeah. So I'm going to primarily focus on Tsar Nicholas II here. But to do that, I need to kind of backtrack a little bit to his father, which would be Alexander. And there are some things I don't remember by heart, so excuse me, because I have a book open here on my desk.
Oh, that's fine.
But Alexander
quality, but
Alexander was a giant of a man.
Yeah.
He was large, he was muscular, massive beard, like your kind of stereotypical idea of a lot of people of what a man from that period would look like.
Yeah.
If he was going to be in charge of anything, that was Alexander.
Yeah, he held the throne well.
Yes. Alexander, unfortunately, had a very prominent addiction to alcohol, a very strong alcohol. So later in his life, he developed a very serious kidney problem. I think it was kidney and liver, if memory serves correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
his wife, the Tsarina at the time, forbade him from drinking, but one of his friends from the military and he had a game they liked to play, which was that they had a special pair of boots designed in which they would hide a flask.
Yeah.
And when she was not paying attention, they would pull the flask from their boots, say a little poem, and then drink, and then hide them again. This just became a game they absolutely loved.
Yeah, unfortunately, it ended up changing the Russian royal family forever, not for the best, unfortunately.
Now, they had 2 sons, and the eldest son was unfortunately the least interested in taking the position of the Tsar for beginners. And secondarily, he was the one who was the least fit or prepared. He had a military education, which his father insisted upon. He was well versed in English and, in fact, had an English education. But he preferred to spend his time with the nobility and the military officers as he did to dealing with anything regarding politics or the actual running of the country.
Yeah. He liked the pomp and circumstance, and the rest could just go away.
Right. And Nicholas was also not a very strong presence. He was generally considered very frail. He was much shorter than his father, who stood well above 6 foot. And Alexander, I think, at his peak was about 5'10" or 5'11", which was still reasonably tall, but not compared to the previous Tsar.
Yeah.
And not have the build. So nobody took him especially seriously beyond the peasantry who had been brought up for generations to idolize the Tsar and the Tsarina because, in the Muscovite tradition, they were considered to be kind of anointed by God to rule the country.
Yeah.
But when Nicholas came into power after his father's passing, there were problems almost immediately. He was married off to a woman, which would be Alexandra, who was actually of German descent and who was also British educated, who did not want to be the Tsarina.
No.
In fact, it had no particular love for Russia as a country.
No, she did not.
So in order to try to kind of avoid problems, she was very quiet and tended to be very distant and avoided public appearances whenever possible.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in stark contrast to the previous Tsarina. So the people tended to look upon her very disdainfully. They tended her as being detached and cold and very uncaring.
Yeah.
Which wasn't
not only
entirely
that,
inaccurate. But
one of his first acts, if I remember right, was Germany and Russia were having a little bit of a squabble at the time.
Yeah, just a little.
And his first act as Tsar was to immediately call for an end to hostilities. And when they went to the peace treaty table, the treaty favored the Germans, which did not go over very well with his fellow Russians.
And this factors into 2 major issues, even very early on with this particular rulership, is that Nicholas despised politics. He did not like nor trust the acting political parties, whether it be the Duma faction or their equivalent of a parliament. He had no particular attachment to anyone but the church.
Yeah.
Because of his belief in the Muscovite tradition of the Tsar being appointed by God, he had a very good rapport with the church.
Yes.
But he routinely not only ignored, but tended to blatantly disregard the Duma, which were basically should have kind of been part of the power base because they had a more direct interaction with most of the peasantry, which the Tsar claimed to be all about, the Tsar and his people, which he considered to be the peasantry. But he had no concept of how to do anything. But the problem was he was very much, he was what I would call a paperwork ruler. He would take the tiniest tasks that he decided were important and obsess over them. So he would take all the minutiae of running the country and insist upon handling himself rather than to hire a private secretary or to have assistants hand it down to the politicians.
He didn't believe in delegation.
So this caused a lot of unrest amongst the politicians, many of whom, were part of noble houses.
Yeah.
Who traditionally would support the Tsar. They started to very much have an issue with them. His wife decided after a short time in her office that she bought wholeheartedly into the Muscovite idea of the Tsar being the owner of all of Russia.
Yeah.
So she would push and goad and just harass her husband into this, and this needs to happen. Never mind the Duma or any of the lesser political offices. You're the Tsar. Do this.
Yeah.
And it was said by more than a few people that the trousers in the house were worn by his wife.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, unfortunately, she got later on. I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but unfortunately, she had some really bad influence.
Mm-hmm.
Once her son.
We'll come to that because I know we got limited time. So there was a man, which many people have heard the name, but I don't know how many people know really much about him. And I'm not going to get too far into it because that would take a whole nother episode. But Grigory Rasputin was a man who was a complete illiterate, a peasant, who was brought into the church at the behest of one of the church leaders and trained.
Yeah.
Grigory Rasputin was a very by most renditions, a very disturbing looking man. He was not an attractive man. He was scraggly. He had very unpleasant physical features, but he had a way about him with his personality, which when he would get people's attention, he could keep it. The church kind of sought to take advantage of this. As an aside, Rasputin tended to lean towards a factor of their religion which had been forbidden and in fact was banned legally because it was considered too pagan and cult-like. It involved the notion that a sinner could be just as close to God via acknowledgement of his own sins and imperfections as a pious man could be.
Yes.
And so it encouraged things like drug abuse, alcoholism, orgies, a lot of sexual deviance, which is one of the reasons it was banned and the church did not acknowledge it. And it was never proven that he followed this particular belief despite his actions. But the son of the Tsar and the Tsarina, Alexandra, had hemophilia, which is a very dangerous condition even now.
Yeah.
Back then, it was always fatal. It was just more of a matter of time as anything. There was no real way to treat it.
It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when.
Grigory Rasputin came in because of their connections with the church and their belief so hard in the church as what I can only equate as their equivalent of a faith healer at the time.
Yeah.
He came
For
in.
the most part, yeah.
He chanted, he performed parlor tricks, as some people would refer to them, and convinced people that he was staving off the effects of the hemophilia on Alexei, which was
basically he put it in made it so that it was without me your son dies.
Yes, he made them dependent upon him. And the issue being, and a very, very prominent issue, was the longer this went on, the more that Tsarina Alexandra came to rely on him.
Yes.
And the more he was acutely aware of this. His position in the court grew exponentially. He
had no business being where he was.
No, he did not. And the nobles knew this, and they were very, very unhappy about this. There were multiple attempts to assassinate Grigory Rasputin over time. There were pleas with the Tsar to have him removed, to investigate him. He was investigated without the Tsar's permission on numerous occasions. And, of course, because of their dependency on him and the belief he could save their son, nothing was ever done about what they had discovered. Even at one point, the church themselves had him investigated found him
Mhm.
guilty of a number of very atrocious things, such as lying with married women, assault, rape, a number of infractions of financial nature, and the Tsar would do nothing.
Yeah.
This
Because
very effectively
The
turned the
wife pulled the
nobility.
strings, and the
Yeah.
wife said, "We can't,
We
for
can't
our son's
let
sake,
him go."
he cannot fall." So
And this,
He was
of course,
protected by the
finished
state.
turning the nobles against the Tsar for the most part, with the exception of the most loyal of them. And they joined the politicians in having a distinct problem with the crown. And this is all in the background while the industrialization of Russia has already begun. And the Tsar has actively been fighting, allowing Russia to become more industrialized. They've tried to force things back into the old age. For example, the capital of Russia at this time was St. Petersburg.
yes,
But the Tsar actively decried this and insisted that all of the affairs of the crown still be held in Moscow.
yeah,
And in fact, they went through and they had a lot of things redesigned to look like the old things. They wanted to keep things that way because they had this archaic notion that the crown must own and rule Russia. But it wasn't working because the industrialization, the workers' groups, the politicians all wanted to push Russia forward for its own sake.
yeah, and change is bad.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Eventually, Rasputin was assassinated, and he
Yes.
was gone. His support was no longer there. So this upset the Tsar because the Tsar was heard to say when he was once demanded of by one of his military counselors to remove Rasputin, he was like, "I would rather have a dozen Rasputins than another day of my wife harassing me," basically.
Yeah,
Because Rasputin tended to keep her away when he was
Yeah.
there.
kept her occupied.
Excuse me. So once that was gone, things started to collapse again. There was another cavalcade of doctors who could do nothing, who could not, they were like, you need to prepare for the inevitability of this. Russia was in a financial and, financial, agricultural, industrial crisis by the time that World War I happened.
Yeah,
They were on the brink of civil war for years because of the Tsar's refusal to acknowledge political problems or the fact that political parties needed more power to try to handle any of the issues they were looking at. You had several parties threatening revolution, threatening to overthrow everything for a number of reasons. This is where you had early communists rearing their heads by another name.
Mhm.
And the Bolshevik Party, which of course we know was responsible for a great deal later,
yes,
were coming up during this. But during World War I, if nothing else, Nicholas II adored the Russian military.
Yeah,
And he may not have supported the politics, but he supported their military because that was what he knew. He was in the military academy. He was a military officer at one point. In fact, he refused to accept a rank above colonel because it was the rank his father had given him when he was alive.
yeah,
So when they started getting reports from the front of World War I that soldiers were starving, people were refusing to fight, they were suffering desertions, the issues at home were causing massive issues on the front. This seemed to somewhat snap him out of his stuporous freaking handling of these situations. And yeah, OMG, that's also correct. The Tsar would usually attempt, and it was usually a visual attempt, the most shallow attempt at liberalizing the country. But then someone would attempt to assassinate them, and the next Tsar would just double back.
yeah. Anything
But-
that undermined his supreme power
Mhm.
it was bad.
But a council of military and political interests, who I will not get into personally, because again, that would take far too long to get into them as individuals, were sent to speak to the Tsar and basically explain that you have to abdicate or everything is going to collapse. We've reached a point of no return. This has to happen. You have to give up the throne.
Yeah.
At this point, Nicholas II was so harried and so exhausted and so just done with all of this. When it was brought up as a notion, he had already basically decided he would do so.
Yeah.
But he couldn't, via the normal means, abdicate the throne to his son because he could not. He would have to leave the capital and the castle once he had abdicated. So he would not be allowed to stay with his son if he abdicated the throne to his son.
Yeah.
And they were unwilling to abandon their son in his condition, so he abdicated the throne, or at least he would dictate that he would abdicate the throne to his brother Mikhail.
Yeah.
Who most people saw as a good candidate for a better ruler as it was, and who had no objection. So officially, he would abdicate the throne to his brother so that he could continue, so that they could take their son with him and continue desperately to seek a cure or some means to treat the hemophilia.
Yeah. So he would live in exile is the idea.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Just as the later traitor king would in Britain.
Yeah. Pretty similar, yes.
Yes. Which led to the whole royal family line we have now.
Very true. And it was said many times, and we discussed this before the stream, that over the course of time, the politicians desperately looking for a way to avert the revolution they saw coming, tried to convince him to liberalize the country and its functionality just enough to basically make him a constitutional monarch.
Yeah, just like Britain and Germany.
As Britain's done, so that he could remain the Tsar and maintain his family position and name and title, but allow the country to somewhat run itself via its systems. But of course, he being so stubbornly rooted in the Muscovite tradition would not hear this at all.
No, this was blasphemy.
And his wife, unfortunately, in his ear and his closest confidants, not wanting to lose the power base they had, despite the fact it was crumbling underneath them, would not hear of it either.
Yeah. And with World War I, it just complicated everything.
World War I kind of forced the hand of everyone involved.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons.
Yes.
And yes, Russia had faced repeated attempts at revolution since 1825. That is entirely accurate. But again, I didn't want to dive too much into the previous revolutions.
Yeah.
This is kind of just covering Nicholas's
Russia
failure.
was of the three, which Germany, Britain, Russia. Russia was the most unstable of the group. They were also
it was also one of the harshest places to live.
Yeah,
so
and the most backward.
Faced a lot of problems.
They were the most
here.
behind.
Yeah.
In times, shall we say? So even though Germany was technically a newer kingdom, shall we say, than Russia was, they were much further ahead industrially and just in all aspects. They were much further ahead than Russia was. Russia was still trying to rule in a way that had been basically proven to no longer be able to do so with what was going on globally. So
they were holding their entire country back based on the simple notion that they were ordained to rule Russia forever.
Yeah.
And it was a concept and a practice which not only held Russia back, but was actively forcing Russia to turn on itself.
Yes. Yeah. And ultimately it led to the downfall of Russia and then the rise of communism because of the power vacuum that it left.
When the Bolsheviks came in to fill the vacuum in power, they only made things worse.
Yeah, just a tad. But that's another story for another day.
Of course.
So if you had to narrow it down, and I know this is really hard because it's putting it really layman, but if you had to go top 5 reasons for the fall, where would you put it?
Top 5 in no particular order would be the appointment of Nicholas as the heir to begin with. Because honestly, if Alexander was so firm in the belief, and he referred to his son oftentimes as a girl, that he had no fitness or right to rule, then he should have broken with tradition enough to train Mikhail instead from the very beginning. Secondarily would be the involvement of Grigory Rasputin and his being allowed to come into so much power that he turned the other noble houses against the Tsar and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly was as much as politicians can be a pain, was the complete ignorance of anything going on politically of the Tsar himself, because Nicholas would become bored immediately with political talk and ignore it or demand the subject be changed.
Yeah.
So he had no real grasp of what was going on when people would speak of impending revolution. It's not something he was willing to hear.
Yeah.
And the other failing is, of course, the fact that the office of the Tsar and the Tsarina both refused to acknowledge the fact that Russia needed to advance, and to advance, the Tsar needed to at least step to the side and allow things to function in the way that they needed to.
Yeah.
Because financial and, well, financial especially, but financial and cultural decline was what led to a lot of the following problems. The fact that they were held back for so long from technological advancement, agricultural advancement, which was desperately needed in the climate they lived in to maintain. So I would say those would be the top things that brought that on.
Yeah. And never being able to step out of his father's shadow didn't help, for sure. I mean, just it's the old adage of, you're trying to live up to your dad, which I think is part of the reason why because he was seen as less than for so long.
Mm-hmm.
He was always trying. That might have contributed to him not allowing himself to relieve power, because it would be shown as weakness, and he had to. He couldn't do that because he had to prove everybody wrong. He could do this. He could run the country. He could. Problem is he couldn't.
You had a man of weak constitution and weak will in a lot of cases, surrounded by stronger personalities, all trying to push him in directions.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm going to cut it short because I know poor Jeff here is coming on his lunch hour, and I want him to be able to eat a little bit here. So we're going to let Jeff go back to work and doing stuff. So I
appreciate that.
I want to say thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for taking time out of your lunch hour to join us.
Now, if we need to, we can go a little bit longer.
Well, I
was
think
there anything else?
No, I think
we summed it up fairly, considering we came into this knowing we were going to have a limited time frame.
Yeah, so. I think we've summed this up. It's more just to start the conversation. That's what these live streams are for. They're not to give everybody a minute by minute breakdown of the topic at choice. It's more just to start the conversation. I do want to draw light to, as I have in the pinned comment, the tribute to Doom. Myself, Revan, and Paula collaborated on it. It was made because on October the 2nd, Paula Simpson, which is Richard Simpson's wife, had a celebration of life that a lot of us could not attend. So it was a way of us attending it in spirit. And I think it turned out well. And if you could, give it a like, give it a share. I greatly appreciate it. Also, my lovely woman has put Far's channel in the chat.
Thank you, by the
go
way.
over there and check it out. And if you like it, hit the old subscribe button and give him shit. I mean, make sure you're there for his live stream. Also, there's a big collaboration that's going to be taking place over the next couple of weeks, starting, I believe, next week, with myself, Loki's Mornings of Mischief, Pat S, Latino Slant, a few other channels. We're all going to be doing a special on the Band of Brothers series. Tuesday
I'm looking
the
forward to that.
12th and the Tuesday the 19th, there will be a live stream hosted on History with R&R. In regards to that, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun collab. I know Loki's Mornings of Mischief will start us off Monday, and Purple will start us off even more with the pre-show on Monday, the 11th. So look forward to those, and definitely go and pay a visit to the channels and just enjoy some fun history, I guess. And with that, as my late co-host would say, thank you and good night.